Hi there, my name is Eric Fesko, and I'm the Director of Discipleship at Christ Pres. Along with Melanie Rayner, we're walking you through Signs of the Savior, understanding the miracles of Jesus. Welcome to week 2 of that study, and I'm going to give you a bonus right out of the gate today. You're going to get a 2-for-1. We're going to look at 2 of Jesus' miracles. So not only are we going to look at the account in Mark where Jesus feeds the 5,000, but we're also going to look at another miracle and see how it relates to this one. So we might jump around a little bit between the Gospels, highlighting some of the details that weren't mentioned in Mark. So we've got a lot to cover and a little time to do that. So buckle up, here we go. So as with all the miracles that we're looking at in this series, it's easy to compartmentalize them. I think we have a tendency and a desire to do that. In other words, it's easy to isolate them as stories and just look at them as an innocuous detail in the life of Jesus. Here's another miracle that Jesus performed. Of course he performed a miracle. He's God and he can do whatever he wants. And then we'll look at an account like this one, like the feeding of the 5,000, or the one that we looked at last week when Jesus turned the water into wine. We'll look at those accounts and merely think of them as miracles of convenience. Well, they were out of wine. Jesus has superhuman powers, so he fixed the problem. Same thing in this account. Here's a bunch of people, they're all hungry. Jesus has superhuman powers, so he fixed the problem. Nothing more to see here. Well, I hope you've already started to pick up on the idea that Jesus never did a miracle for the sake of convenience. There was always a message behind the miracle. Why would Jesus feed 5,000 people? And what's the message behind that miracle? What do you think? What are your thoughts? Hopefully you've had a chance to read through the passage, which is Mark 6:30 to 44. If you haven't, go ahead and pause the video and read through that passage. And while you're at it, see if you can ascertain why Jesus did this miracle and what's the message behind it, okay? So if you haven't done that, go ahead and do that. But if you have done that, here we go. To really understand what Jesus is doing here, we have to back up quite a bit. So the first stop we'll have to make in our Bibles to understand this passage is all the way back to Exodus, the book of Exodus, second book of the Bible. Think about the context of that book. God's people are exiting out of Egypt, an exodus, leaving their old lives of slavery behind and entering into their new life as a new creation. That's the context of Exodus. And the people that left their old life behind, as they wandered through the desert, by what means were they sustained? How did they eat? Where did they get their food? Do you remember that? Literally, manna, bread, fell from heaven. Bread fell from the sky. What sustained the people of God? What kept the people of God alive? It was the bread that came down from heaven. So, if you're a student of the Old Testament, or the Scriptures, as they were known in Jesus' day, bread that fell from the sky is a pretty significant event in the Old Testament. Bread is symbolic of life. And with that knowledge, and with that image we have from bread from the Old Testament, let's fast forward now to the New Testament. Mark chapter 6. Quick question. Jesus fed the 5,000. What was on the menu that day? Fish and bread. Fish and bread. We just talked about bread a second ago and the significance of it in the Old Testament. Do you suppose there's a connection here? How many of you are going to be surprised if I say yes? Notice what it says in verse 42. Once Jesus miraculously multiplied the food, and they all ate and were satisfied, it says, and they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. There was an abundance of bread. Remember, Melanie talked about an abundance of wine last week. Abundance, okay? Does that remind you of anything? Does that remind you of anything we talked about just a few minutes ago? Bread from heaven. Life-sustaining bread from heaven in abundance. Answer me this. Who was it that provided that life-sustaining bread from heaven back in Exodus? Who did that? It was God himself. God himself provided the bread. Are you starting to see the significance of this particular miracle? The feeding of the 5,000, there's always a purpose behind the miracle that Jesus performed. The miracles he performed were never, ever, ever, ever just for the sake of convenience. Oh, here's a mob of people who are hungry. What should we do about it? Jesus says, stand back, I'll handle this. No, what's the message behind the miracle? If it was God himself who provided bread to God's people in Exodus, what's the message that Jesus is communicating in providing bread here? It is only God himself who provides bread from heaven. In other words, Jesus is saying, in no uncertain terms, perhaps it was uncertain at the time, but he's saying, I am God. In the moment, how many disciples do you think picked up on that message? I promise you this, the disciples didn't get it. Want to know how I know that? Well, the Bible tells us that. Have you noticed that for those of you using the workbooks that we provided that go along with the study, we ask you what happened before this account and what happened after this account. Those are always important details when we're looking at these miracles. So let's notice what happened just after this miracle. And here's what I want you to notice. Normally, when you read the Bible, we'd read a section, and the section heading, it usually gives us a heading, and it indicates that that account is done. That particular account is finished. And we'll look at those headings and say, okay, next story. Story's over. And in fact, if your Bible's like mine, there's a break between these verses and even a heading that tells us something about what happens next, as if we've heard all there is to hear about the account that we just read. But again, let me tell you this, the story's not over. The next verse after ours, which is verse 45, this wasn't in your reading, but I'm still going to highlight it anyway. This is the bonus. But verse 45, it says, immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. Now stop and chew. Stop and slowly digest the word immediately there. Just to give you a little more insight to that word, in the Greek, it's a word that suggests immediately by force. Okay? It's as if Jesus is hustling his disciples into the boat to get them away from the crowd. Why would he want to do that? Well, make no mistake about it. Everyone who just witnessed what Jesus did must have been pretty impressed. A guy that can do miracles? What did my eyes just see? A guy that can do something like that? What can he do for us? A guy like that, well, he could probably free us from Rome. Maybe he could be king. Pretty impressive, Jesus. So maybe the disciples were getting carried away with a make him king parade. Do you want to know how I know that? Hang with me a few more minutes here. Jesus shoves the disciples onto a boat and kicks the boat out to sea while he goes off alone to pray. The disciples get into the boat and head out, leaving Jesus behind. At this point, the waters start to flex their muscles on them. Look at this next verse. This is the beginning of verse 48. Jesus is watching them from the shore. Verse 48, it says, and he saw them, and they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. Now, chew on that word. Digest that word, painfully. Painfully, it says. I don't know if you've ever had the good pleasure of trying to row a boat in rough waters, but let me tell you something. There's a reason that a rowing machine is a workout instrument in the gym, because it's hard and you're not used to it. You're going to be worn out in about 5 minutes, and that's without waves and wind and rain, right? Make no mistake about it, the disciples are on the struggle bus here. It's not a stretch to think that some of them might even be thinking, are we going to make it? Are we going to make it? Let me read for you now the next part of verse 48. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass them by. Now, that's a funny sentence, because at first pass, it reads as if Jesus might even be joking around a little bit. For most of my Christian adult life, I read that verse like this. He was walking on the sea, and he just wanted to sort of pass them by, as if he was saying, hey, see you guys, I'll be over here, right? And I so wanted that to be a joke, but that's not what the text is telling us. Go back to the bread, all right? Who is it that gives us life-sustaining bread from heaven? It's God himself. He's communicating the fact, I'm God incarnate. Now, let me read for you from the book of Job, chapter 9, verse 8. It says this, Job 9, verse 8, who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea? Or how about this, Job 38, 16, When God is dressing down Job, he says, have you entered into the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Let me tell you, there's more. There are more, like Psalm 77:19. Your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. And even that language of Jesus passing by, think of Exodus 33, when the Lord passed by Moses. This is very specific language, all right? Who is it? What are these words telling us? Who is it that walks on the waters? Who tramples the waves of the sea? Who passes by in the recesses of the deep? Whose path is through the great waters? That would be God himself. God walks on the waters. Only God can do that. So what's the message Jesus is communicating to the disciples here? I'm not just a king in the way that you're thinking. I'm God. So what's the message here? Who is Jesus? Notice how this account in Mark of Jesus walking on the water comes to a conclusion. This is why I paired the two. This is Mark 6:51-52. And he got into the boat. Remember, our headings have changed. We're now into another account. We're reading about Jesus walking on the water. New story, right? Verse 51, and he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased. And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand. Here it is, verse 52, for they did not understand about the loaves. The loaves. But their hearts were hardened. Wait a minute, I thought we were done with that account. I thought this was about Jesus walking on the water. Why are we still talking about the loaves? See, they're connected. These two accounts are connected. Their hearts were hardened. The disciples' hearts were hardened because they were thinking about the material. What can I get if Jesus is king? If he can make bread from nothing, if he can fill my stomach, what else can he do for me? What gain is there for me? Yeah, let's make him king. And so Jesus says, no, you're missing it. You're missing it entirely. This isn't about the material. Let me tell you again, but this time I'm going to tell you on the water. Who alone can do these things? Who alone can pass by on the waters? Who alone can bring bread from heaven? In other words, and you really get a sense of this if you read the same account in John, Jesus is saying the bread that your ancestors ate was just a pointer. It wasn't the real thing that would sustain them forever. It was just a pointer. They ate that bread and they still died in Exodus. They ate the bread from heaven and they still died, but it's just a pointer. It wasn't the real thing. It pointed forward to the one who would sustain them forever. The bread that I'll bring you along with it, the fish for 5,000 people, it's not the real thing. It's not the real thing that would sustain them forever and make them never hunger again. It too is just a pointer. It's a pointer to the only one who's able to make you never hunger again. And so this is where Jesus is headed with all this. How do you get this bread? How do you get the bread that will cause you to never hunger, never to long for anything because you're perfectly content, perfectly satisfied, perfectly fulfilled? Well, that alone has to come from God. Only God alone can provide that life-sustaining bread. God himself in the form of Jesus Christ, God in the flesh. And this is why Jesus tells us in John chapter 6, verse 51, he says, I am the living bread. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. He says, it's me. The pointer was pointing to me. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. You see, God's intention isn't just to make you an all-around better person. He's got much bigger plans than that. It's his desire to conform you to his likeness, to make you more like Jesus. You might say that he desires for you to not be passive with your relationship with Jesus, but he wants you to ingest Jesus, consume him. When we talk about being united with him, he means that close, like you're consuming him. So Jesus makes this connection to bread and gives us this powerful metaphor, which basically tells us that to share in the life of God, to live eternally with God, that is granted to those who come to Jesus in faith, are conformed to him, and enter into union with Him. I hope that helps you understand this passage just a little bit better. There's so much to unpack here, and I know we just have a little time to do that. So I hope you enjoy your discussion. I hope more of these truths come out as you examine them, and may God bless you as you read through and discuss this passage together.